Yes! Exclamation point. Who is our next guest? Question mark.
What?
I am Dr. Jasmine Harris, and tonight I am drinking an old-fashioned gin and tonic. I tried to make it a little bit more fancy by putting it in a big glass and adding a slice of grapefruit, but really, it's just a gin and tonic, and when it's hot outside in the summer, it's my favorite drink. So, I am here to tell you guys tonight, while I drink gin and tonics, the story of Anita Hemmings and Ellen Love, the first two Black women to graduate from Vassar College without anybody else knowing. All right, let's get started. So the story starts in 1893, and Anita Hemmings is about to start her first year at Vassar College as a freshman, as a part of the class of 1897. Vassar, at this time, is only for white women. So when Anita applies to Vassar, she puts on her application that she is of French and English ancestry. But in reality, Anita Hemmings' parents are mulatto, which at the time was used to describe half Black and half white people. Maybe not half, some sort of a mix. You know, this is the time where there's the one drop rule. So if there's any amount of Negro blood in your bloodline, you are seen as a Black person, and you're not privy to the same kinds of access to resources like higher education. And so, knowing this, Anita decides that she is going to try to pass as white to attend this college. Unfortunately, Anita's parents, just like most of the rest of her siblings and family, are not as light as she is in terms of skin tone, and so they can't pass in the same way. So Anita goes off to Vassar College to be this perfect white socialite Vassar girl, and her parents and her siblings stay back in the all-Black Roxbury neighborhood of Boston, where she grew up, to continue their lives living as Black people. So everything is going well. I should have said earlier that Anita is beautiful, and what we know about pretty privilege, right, is that any person who is beautiful, even in 1893, isn't subjected to the same kinds of rigor, interrogation as others. So because she was beautiful, people just let her pass. She was in the Vassar College choir. She was on the debate team. She was even really well loved in the Poughkeepsie population. Poughkeepsie is the town where Vassar is located. And she would be invited by rich families in the area to come to their home and sing for them as a part of fancy dinners that they did. So she was a hit. She got there and she was able to perform whiteness and in particular this combination of white and upper classness as a woman at this time that made her allowed her, I should say, I guess, to have access to resources and people and places that her parents, her siblings would never have access to, and that she wouldn't really have access to if she wasn't passing in this way. So everything is going well, right? But Anita has been rooming with this woman since her first year, and her roommate is totally jealous and envious of every part of Anita's life. Anita is the most beautiful person on campus. Men from Harvard and Yale who would come for social gatherings would say she's maybe the most beautiful woman who ever attended the school. She was popular. She had everything that her roommate wanted. And there was really nothing that her roommate could do about it until Anita made a mistake, which is, sometimes what happens when you're trying to keep a lie going for a long time, right? She is lonely. She misses her family that she can't talk to or really connect with or communicate with because she's passing and they're not. But she allows her younger brother, Frederick Hemmings, who is just starting out as a first-year student at MIT, to visit her in her third year at Vassar. Now, I don't even know why she would do this because, as I said earlier, her parents and siblings were not light enough in skin tone to pass as white. And so, though her brother was currently attending MIT, he was attending MIT as a colored person. In fact, he was attending MIT as the only colored person in that particular class. And perhaps if you saw him by himself, you may think that he was white and tan or some combination of white and non-Negro that made him look the way that he did. But in the cohort picture of everyone in his class at MIT, you can tell that he is clearly the darkest skinned person there. I say all that to say that Anita made this decision without really thinking through what might happen if somebody went digging into her brother's past. She probably didn't think that anybody would because she felt that she was passing so easily that why would anybody care? She didn't realize that her roommate was so jealous that she would follow any lead that she possibly could. And Anita's brother Frederick coming to campus was an amazing lead because people did start to dig into their past a little bit. They found a photo of the MIT cohort that Frederick was a part of that shows him clearly looking more dark-skinned. And they started to ask questions about his racial identity. Now, it's 1896, so you can't just look on Facebook to get, information about him being the only colored person in his class. But that information can still be assumed based on his physical characteristics, which is what we do a lot in race and racism in the United States. And so Anita's roommate calls her father a rich white man, and she says to him, "This roommate that has been the bane of my existence since I got here, I think that she may be of non-white descent, and I need you to go figure it out." So, being a rich white man, he hires a private investigator, and the private investigator goes in search of answers. And it's really not that hard because, as I said earlier, Anita's family is still living in the all-Black, segregated Roxbury neighborhood of Boston. And so when the private investigator tracks them down there, it's an easy open and shut case. This woman is of Negro descent. So the private investigator takes that information to the roommate's father. The roommate's father contacts the president of the university, President Taylor at the time, and lets him know this information. And the president, he doesn't know what to do because it's a school for all white women. He can't have this information getting out because it might diminish the reputation of the college itself. He can't have these rich white families thinking that there are Negroes all around. Why would I send my child there if that were the case? But also, graduation is coming up. We're a week away from graduation now. After all of this has passed, the search by the private investigator, the sending of information from the private investigator to the father, from the father to the president. Remember, it's 1896, so there's no texting, there's no social media. These things move slowly. By the time the president hears about it, we're a week away from graduation. does he decide to not let Anita graduate and maybe have that become local news? If she creates a fuss, does he let her graduate and have it get out that she is of Negro descent? And now Vassar is seen as admitting these kinds of students, which they don't want to be seen as doing at the time. And so the president decides to let her graduate. Some teachers come to her aid and her defense, and he really doesn't want all of the attention of graduating a Black woman. So he says, Anita, you can graduate, but nobody knows about this. As far as everybody is concerned, you are graduating as a white woman, which is fine with Anita. She wants to be a white woman. That is why she is at Vassar, right? But it's just as important to her as it is to President Taylor that nobody find out what's happening. So she agrees to this. Graduation goes off without a hitch, no problems. Well, that's not the end of the story, obviously. Instead, less than 3 months after graduation, every newspaper on the East Coast has the story. Now, we don't know where it came from, but it can be readily assumed that it was probably the roommate or the roommate's father. And Anita's devastated. She leaves Poughkeepsie in shame. She goes back to the Roxbury neighborhood that she grew up in. She ends up having to take a job at the Boston Public Library as a foreign cataloger for a couple of years and live as a Black woman, which she really doesn't want to do. She's gone through a lot of effort to not have to live this life. And now she's being forced to live this life because the information of her passing is everywhere. So why is she so upset about this? Well, Anita understood probably better than a lot of Black people did, and this can be said of most Black people who were passing at that time, that there was power in racial identity, and that because of some hiccup, in genetic phenotypes, she had a skin color that allowed her to blend in with white community members in ways that were not true of other people of Negro descent. And she also understood that there's a lot of power in being white. You get access to resources, you get access to money, you get access to neighborhoods, you get access to jobs that you never would. And she wanted that. And she clearly wanted that from 17 years old when she applies to Vassar as a white woman. So she understands the social construction of race, but she also understands the hierarchy of it. So she's going for it. I say all of that to say that we shouldn't be surprised when 3 years after all of this happens at Vassar, she meets Andrew Love, Dr. Andrew Love, I should say, who is also of Negro descent and has his own history of passing to go through medical school. And they meet while she's working at the Boston Public Library. They realize that they're both really interested in living as white people, and they decide to get married. They move to the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and Dr. Andrew Love opens his own medical practice, and they live for 30 years as a prominent white family that owns a medical practice in this neighborhood. They raise 3 children as white people. They send those children to the Horace Mann School, which even today in 2021 is one of the top private high schools in Manhattan. And they think that everything is good. But everything's not good. Otherwise, I wouldn't be telling this story, right? So what happens? Their oldest daughter, Ellen Love, hears from her mother over the course of her life how great Vassar is. She wants to go there too. And so she applies. She doesn't know that she is a woman of Negro descent when she applies. She thinks she's a white woman like her mother was. She doesn't know all of the hubbub, right, around her mother's graduation. And on her application, just as on her mother's, they put French and English as her ancestry, and she is admitted. A few months, it is rumored, I should say, there should be a little graph underneath that says these facts have not been corroborated, right? But the rumor is that she found out, Ellen Love, that she was a woman of Negro descent right before she left for Vassar as part of the class of 1927 to meet her maternal grandmother, Dora Logan, who is Anita Hemmings' mother. And it is rumored that Dora told her everything and that she was well aware of her true racial ancestry by the time that she arrived at Vassar, and she made the choice to pass as a white woman. And it's really the same story. You know, Ellen gets to Vassar and she's a hit, she's popular, she's enjoying herself. And just when it seems like she'll be able to pass without a hitch, who shows up again? But the jealous roommate. Yes, I mean her mother's jealous roommate. 30 years later, shows up. She goes to a reunion event, and she hears that Anita Hemmings' daughter is now attending Vassar, and she is incensed. How could they possibly allow her daughter to be there when they know her racial ancestry? So she writes a letter, again, because it's like 1926, right? She writes a letter to the president of the college, and she tells him that this woman, Ellen Love, who was there, is of Negro descent. Her mother was of Negro descent and graduated in 1897, and she is still upset about the atrocity of being forced to room with a Negro woman, and she doesn't think that any other white women at Vassar should be subjected to this. I mean, it's just really petty at the finest degree, right? The president, I think, sort of acknowledging some of the petty, writes back, and he's like, we know, thanks. We already know. We know who Anita Hemmings is. We flagged it when she applied. She's living in a single room by herself to avoid the situations that happened with her mother, but we are not sure that she knows that she is of Negro descent, because our research tells us that they are living as white people, which may mean that Ellen doesn't know. We're not going to say anything, and we're just going to let her graduate. And that's exactly what they did. And Ellen, making the decision to pass in 1923, never looks back. She takes a page out of her mother's book and raises all of her children as white people. And even on her deathbed, doesn't say anything to them. She does tell her best friend and makes her best friend promise that she is not going to say anything until she's long passed. So the best friend waits 2 years, and in 1997 reveals to the family, including a granddaughter, Jill Sim, who was sort of at the forefront of all of this when it was in the press back then, of their true racial ancestry. And they had no idea. 30-something white people that have no idea that they're actually of Negro descent. And it's really interesting if you want to go and look to see how they were sort of dealing with finding that information out and how they ended up going about their lives. But I like the story, not just because it's salacious, not just because it's really gossipy and I'm really into that, but because it's a really good example of how flimsy the social construction of race is and how much it's built on this very nebulous concept of melanin, right? That is just, you know, it's the summertime. I'm getting darker. I look like a darker skinned person in the summertime than I do in the wintertime. And that's because that's the way that sun and skin work. But we have decided as humans that also should say something about what access you have to resources, to capital, to education in this case. And Anita Hemmings' father, when the first media frenzy was happening around her graduation, said something in a newspaper quote that I thought was really conducive to this understanding of the social construction of race. He said, "We knew our daughter went to Vassar as a white girl and stayed there as such. As long as she conducted herself as a lady, she never thought it necessary to proclaim the fact that her parents were mulattoes." And basically what her father is saying is, yeah, she performed like a white girl. She did everything you guys asked of her and you loved her. Why would she go and tell you what the melanin content of her parents was? What does that have to do with how well she was doing at Vassar? And really the answer is everything, because we really only care about how people fit into these very rigid and strict racial categories that we've created, and not about the behaviors and the characteristics that they embody as a human being. So I hope you enjoyed this story of the first two Black women who graduated from Vassar without anybody knowing, and get yourself a gin and tonic.